two, three. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I ever get back. Oh, it's root for the Cubbies. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game.
This is the Monday Morning Quarterback on the 20th of November 2017 from WBRN Radio in Boston and on the Boston Red Network. We're changing up our program lineup a little bit. We'll put sports first, and then we'll go into the political contest, news of the day, etc. By doing this, it's a little bit different than what we normally do. A programming note on the 20, let me look at it here, make sure I get it right. The 24th, that is the American Thanksgiving. We'll have special programming there as Thanksgiving relates to ordinary people. For instance, spending the day with the family. It is the most traveled day of the holiday season. It is a family day, and we'll be looking at how working people are faring under the first year of DJ Trump. And that will be on Thursday, and we'll have other special programming as we move along here. We had special programming today, a speech by President Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe, about a 20-minute address he gave to the nation in Zimbabwe and, of course, to the world, that he would stay on and he would preside over the next party conference. Now, there are other machinations going on. They've given him an ultimatum to resign or be impeached the week coming up. We'll see how those things turn out, and we'll keep you informed on many of these channels. We'll place a link on this program to the Zimbabwe coverage of his speech and of commentary after his the speech, and of course our commentaries in there also. But to the sporting scores of the day, we'll start with the NBA. The Wizards were at the Raptors in Toronto. The Raptors 100-91 for the Wizards of D.C. The Pacers were at the Heat, and the Heat was not very hot. The Pacers 120-95. The Warriors were in New York. The Warriors 118-111 for the Nets of Brooklyn. The Pistons were at the T-Wolves. Pistons 100-97, very close game, 3-point game there. The Bulls were in Phoenix. Suns 113-105. And finally, the Nuggets were in Los Angeles. Lakers 127-109. And on we go to college football. These are the scores from, let's start with Saturday here, I suppose. Mercer was and they were shut out by number 1 Alabama. The Citadel at Clemson. Clemson's number 2. Clemson 61-3. And Virginia at the University of Miami 44-28 was the score there. Number 4 Oklahoma 41-3 over the University of Kansas. Michigan was at Wisconsin. Wisconsin is number 5. Michigan was number 24, and 24-10 was the score. Wisconsin, Louisiana, Monroe at Auburn. Auburn 42-14. Kentucky at number 7 Georgia. Georgia 42-13. Navy was at Notre Dame. Notre Dame 24-17. The Illini of Illinois was at Ohio State. Ohio State 52-18. At 14, they are number 9. Nebraska was at Penn State. Penn State at number 10. Days of Joe Paterno. 56 to 44 was the final score. UCLA at USC. The Juice is old school. Orenthal, James Simpson. 28 to 23 USC. TCU at Texas Tech. TCU 27 to 3 for the Red Raiders of Texas Tech. Kansas State at Oklahoma State. Kansas State pulled that one out, 45 to 40. UCF at Temple in Philadelphia, 45 to 19. Mississippi State at Arkansas. Arkansas at one time had good football teams. I suppose they've got into a drought. Mississippi State's number 16, 28 to 21. Maryland at Michigan State. Well, Michigan State pulled us out 17 to 7. The Utah at Washington. Washington 33 to 30. North Carolina at their number 19 at Wake Forest. Wake Forest 30 to 24. LSU at Tennessee. The Volunteers, I think is what they call themselves. 30 to 10 there. And SMU at Memphis. Memphis 66 to 45. California, the Golden Bears at Stanford. They're number 22, 17 to 14. Close game there. Stanford pulled it out by 3 points. Minnesota at Northwestern. It was a laugher. Northwestern's number 23 in the poll. 39 zip. They were shut out. Air Force at Boise State. Boise State is number 25 in the polls. 44 to 19 was the score there. That is the college scores. Let's see what else we have going on here. Week 12, some of the projections going on here. Well, these are the Rose Bowl. That, of course, being Pasadena, California. The projection here is Oklahoma versus Miami. That should be a good game. The Mercedes-Benz Superdome Bowl, that's in New Orleans. Alabama versus Wisconsin. The College Football Playoff National Championship. I should give the dates. That'll be on January the 1st. At Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, Georgia. That the projection is Alabama versus Oklahoma or Alabama versus Miami. Well, we'll see. That would be on the 1st. On the 16th, in the Superdome, that's Mercedes-Benz Bowl, Southern Mississippi versus Georgia State, or UAB versus Troy. The Auto Nation Cure Bowl? I mean, there's so many bowls here. Tennessee versus the Appalachia State, Utah State versus them. The Vegas Bowl, that would be on the 16th. That would be Boise State versus Arizona State, or Boise State versus Oregon. The, what is this one? A bowl in Albuquerque, the Gaiden, New Mexico Bowl. Nonetheless, North Texas versus San Diego State, or FAU versus San Diego. Raycom, that bowl we played in Montgomery, Alabama. Ohio versus Arkansas State, or Northern Illinois versus Arkansas State. In Boca Raton, Florida. Temple versus Middle Tennessee. Temple versus FTU. The Fiesta Bowl, one of the older bowls around. That'll be on, I guess I didn't say when these bowls are. Anyway, on the 20th of December, SMU versus Colorado State, or Memphis versus UCLA. I guess you got a choice there. The Bad Boys Moore's Bowl, where's that thing? St. Petersburg. UNLV versus Southern Mississippi, or Houston versus Marshall. Who else do we have there? Thomas A. Robinson Stadium in Nassau, Bahamas. The Bahamian Bowl, the Bahamas Bowl. That would be FIU versus Northern Illinois. It's a trip to the Bahamas Bowl, I guess we'll call it. North Texas versus Central Michigan. The Idaho Potato Bowl, that'll be in Boise, Idaho. Toledo versus Wyoming, or Ohio versus Fresno State. The Birmingham Bowl, it's in Birmingham, that's on the 23rd. The other one's on the 22nd, Houston versus UCLA. USP versus Middle Tennessee, the Lockheed Martin Bowl. That's the Armed Forces Bowl. San Antonio versus Army, UAB versus Army, that'll be on the 23rd. The Dollar General Bowl, where is it? Mobile, Alabama. Central Michigan versus Georgia State, or Toledo versus Troy. The Hawaiian Bowl, that'll be on the 24th, Christmas Eve, I guess. Navy versus Fresno State, or SMU versus Wyoming. That'll be in Honolulu. Who else we got going here? The Cotton Bowl in Dallas, Texas. Utah versus Marshall, or Texas Tech versus UT, University of Texas, San Antonio. They don't get the top. Cotton Bowl used to be a top bowl, now I guess not anymore. Ford Field in Detroit, Michigan. Western Kentucky versus Western Michigan, or Udall versus Western Michigan. That'll be on the 26th. The Citrus Bowl, that'll be in Phoenix, Chase Field. Nonetheless, Kansas State versus Oregon, or Kansas State versus Arizona State. These are two different dueling commentators here. Anyway, the Independence, Shreveport, Louisiana Independence Bowl. Walk-ons, I have no idea. Anyway, let's see. Florida State versus FAU, or Florida State versus Western Kentucky. The Pinstripe Bowl, that'll be in Yankee Stadium in New York. I guess that's a new one. Virginia Tech versus Purdue, or Boston College versus Akron. In Santa Clara, California, the Foster Farms Bowl. I have no idea on that one. That'll be on the 27th of December. Indiana versus Stanford, or Michigan versus Stanford. The Texas Bowl in Houston, Iowa State. One person has it versus Texas A&M, or Texas versus Texas A&M. Well, Hale has it there. Two of these characters here dueling. The Military Bowl. The Air Force versus Virginia, or the Navy versus Virginia. Well, the Camping Bowl, that'll be in Orlando, Florida on the 28th. North Carolina State versus Oklahoma State, or Virginia Tech versus Iowa State. The Alamo Dome in San Antonio, Texas versus Washington State, or Oklahoma State versus Washington State. That is on the 28th. The Qualcomm Bowl, that'll be in San Diego. Washington versus Michigan State, or Washington versus Northwestern. Yeah, they'll have a good draw. People get out of the cold. In Charlotte, the Bank of America Bowl, Wake Forest versus Kentucky, or well, same thing. The Hyundai Bowl, that'll be in El Paso, Texas. Boston College versus Arizona, or Louisville versus Arizona. The Franklin American Mortgage Bowl, that'll be in Nashville. And one has Iowa, projected Iowa versus Missouri, or Iowa versus South Carolina. That's around there. In Tucson at the Arizona Stadium. Utah State or New Mexico State. One pundit has it there, another pundit. Colorado State versus Louisiana Lafayette. I guess he couldn't get anyone. The Cotton Bowl Classic, the Goodyear Cotton Bowl Classic, that is at A&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas. TCU versus Auburn, or TCU versus Penn State. Should be a good game either way. In Jacksonville, Florida, the Tax Slayer Bowl. Boy, that is on the 30th. North Carolina State versus Missouri, or Louisville versus South Carolina. One pundit has it. The Liberty Bowl, it's been around. It's in Memphis, Tennessee, on the 30th of December. West Virginia versus Memphis or West Virginia versus LSU. The PlayStation Fiesta Bowl. Oh, well. Glendale, Arizona. Ohio State versus USC. Or Ohio State versus USC. And so they both project that to be the Capital One Bowl. That is in Florida. Miami Gardens, Florida. Clemson versus Notre Dame. There. That's what's projected to be the Outback Bowl. Well, we have so many bowls running through here. Where are they? They're in Tampa. LSU versus Northwestern, or Mississippi State versus Michigan. The Chick-fil-A Bowl, that'll be the Peach Bowl. That'll be in Atlanta, Georgia. That's been around a long time. Georgia versus UCF, projected to be there. We don't know on these, but anyway, nonetheless, in Orlando, Florida, Mississippi State versus Penn State, Auburn versus Michigan State, and that one. And I don't have the aspect of who's accepted these bowl bids yet. That will be on January 1st, New Year's Day. All of these, the Outback, Chick-fil-A, etc., they will all be there. And we're not sure who accepted the bowl bids. I guess we can kind of give that one up. Some of the Power Week, some that are up, some are down. This is all from ESPN, incidentally. What do we have here? Oops. We somehow got back there. Anyway, the AP poll, Alabama is still number one. Northwestern moves into the Boise State. Northwestern move into the top 25. Doesn't tell you very much there, but you have here, let's see. Number 2 is Miami. Number 3 is Oklahoma. Number 4 is Clemson. Wisconsin is number 5. Auburn, Georgia, Ohio State, Notre Dame, and they round up the TCU. The top 10. Everybody else is scrambling, as they say. Boise State is number 23, and number 25, Virginia Tech. Wait a minute. Virginia Tech returned to 24. So that is the sports. Now we'll run to the real thing. Let's go to the Big Easy. They elected a mayor down there. The first woman to be elected there, LaToya Cantrell. In the 300-year history of the city of New Orleans. She is from California, had been in the Crescent City, as they call it. She has been in New Orleans since relocating from L.A. in 1990. That would be, let's see, arithmetic here, 27 years she's been there. She's 45 years old. She grew up in the 70s, and she's born in 1972. And she, the article here in the New Orleans Picayune, Times-Picayune, about her struggles growing up in Los Angeles. Her mother was a social worker, laid off because of the Reagan draconian cuts. And her father was with, her stepfather was with the LAPD, stepfather, yeah, but he evidently fell out of cracks, on crack, literally. And that caused dysfunction in the family. They had to move in with grandparents. Her mother finally got another job, and she's talking about her family. My grandmother's sister was one of the first African-American women to start a business in Los Angeles. And she was appointed by LBJ to an ambassador of consumer affairs on the administration because of work that happened. My family was very entrepreneurial, as well as understanding the value of education. And she explains here the parts of the family that lived in the South all went to university. She went to Xavier University there in New Orleans. And now she will be the mayor, or is the mayor-elect of New Orleans. She majored in sociology there. And let's just hear a little bit from her. See if we can.
This victory, make no has been rooted in. The people of the city of New Orleans are all about each and every one of us. And let me tell you this. Numbers do not matter. Polling, what votes came in, who voted for you, who didn't. Because we're focused on the future of the city of New Orleans. All of us matter. This has been the people's campaign from day one. I started this campaign going, listening to our people, hearing your cry, but also understanding that we are in a true position to ensure that we are no longer about the haves and the have-nots. That we are going to ensure that our city continues to grow and be strong and give real opportunity. That pie is getting larger so that each and every one of us can share in it. So that each and every one of us can win in our city. So this win tonight is not for me nor my family. This win tonight is for the city of New Orleans.
That was Toya Cantrell, the mayor-elect of the city of New Orleans. I was looking here at some of the articles, didn't read them yet, but she ran on reduction of crime. Of course, the Big Easy, that has been a standard marker forever. A drainage plan, and basically that was it. I get the general inference here, however, that the at least at times, Picayune did not favor LaToya Cantrell. Anyway, nonetheless, let's move on here. A few articles up here from the Washington Post. One, of course, is about the spill. We talked about it on the week, but was around Friday job, or one of the two, and perhaps both. The Trans-Canada Pipeline spill there in South Dakota, remote corner they call it. We went to the remote corner. The spill was bigger than they said it was. They'll be there several days to contain it and clean it up. No doubt about that. This article does mention the Nebraska board will hear or render a final decision. This is the Nebraska Public Service Commission, and it talks about the members there. Let me see, what are they being paid? $75,000 annual salary, and this is one of the longtime supporters here. Introduced a bill that would eliminate the annual salary, and they get $150 per diem, I suppose, for their commuting. Trans-Canada has also played a significant role. This is from the Post, in the state supplying the argument cited in the senator's letter, and also spending $925,224 on lobbying in the state from 2011 to 2015, the fourth biggest sum in Nebraska over the period. That's according to Common Cost. And these are some of the desperados here, despite a slowdown after the collapse and the departure of Royal Dutch Shell and ConocoPhillips. Production from Canadian oil sands is at 385 million barrels there, and Trans-Canada canceled plans for 1.1 million barrel a day line that would have gone to Canada's east coast. They eliminated that. Trans-Canada has received adequate support for the Keystone pipeline from companies shipping 500,000 barrels a day of crude oil through various conditions attached. The company's president said Trans-Canada has argued that the pipeline would create jobs in the U.S., would be safer than the rail alternative. They had some problems there with the rail alternative, too. Has stressed the new technology and a bearing of the 36-inch diameter pipe. Well, they're already having leaks with the bearings there, so Nonetheless, by midday on Friday, TransCanada said on its website there were 75 people. We report there were about 100, so there are more than that at the site, and they are working on stopping the leak. And in the background of this, in Canada, that week in Canada, 3 rail workers were on trial for criminal negligence in the death of 47 people that died there in an unattended rail car carrying crude oil rolled downhill off the tracks and exploded. So in other words, there are dangers in one. One will pollute you. The other one could literally fall on you. The Nebraska Public Service Commission was actually founded in 1885 to regulate the rails, which was a big part of Nebraska, coming out of Omaha, big meat processing town. Then reformed with the passage of a constitutional amendment in 1906 as a railroad commission. Today it regulates the telecommunications, natural gas pipelines, rail safety, grain warehouses, modular homes. It's regulating about everything. Recreational vehicles, high voltage transmission lines, and private water company rates. Rarely does it occupy spotlight as it will on Monday. My take on this, the fix is in there in Nebraska, so it won't be much of a spotlight. Another article here is on Roy Moore is not a pedophile, and this article is written by Rachel Hope Klebitz and Nicholas Siret. Rachel Hope Klebitz is Klebitz, I guess, is professor of history at the University of Victoria, and this Nicholas Siret is a professor of women's studies, gender studies, and sexuality studies at the University of Kansas. What they're talking about, I had not seen this, the hashtag tag, Roy Moore, pedophile, child molester, as a trend on Twitter. A lot of things trend there. The Daily News ran a column that called Moore an accused of pedophile in its headlines. A live interview with MSNBC. Steve Smith said Moore is a pedophile. He's a child molester. Steve Smith is a Republican strategist. He was involved in the campaign of the old man McCain, and also I believe he was in the Willow Romney campaign. My memory doesn't serve me wrong. Anyway, nonetheless, outrage against the candidate from Alabama is entirely fitting, but the terminology is Moore is not a pedophile. I had this conversation with a lady about that. The differences matter. Moore's alleged crime was not sexually oriented towards children. It was his willingness to exploit the unequal power structure of gender and age to victimize young girls who couldn't stand up to him. To understand Moore as a monster outside of medical or societal norms is to ignore the way in which his position enabled him, he was assistant DA, to take advantage of alleged victims. Much like the claims of a sexual addiction offered by other powerful men in recent weeks, accounting for sexual abuse with a diagnosis of pedophilia, obscures the way that abusive behavior fits into our everyday sexual system that privileged powerful men to take advantage of you females and the less powerful. The diagnosis, and this is one of the things Doc Holloway, who used to be our director here, used to talk about this. He was a psychologist anyway. Nonetheless, a diagnosis statistical manual of mental disorders defines a pedophilia disorders as when an individual over 16 experiences recurring and intense sexual arousal, fantasies and sexual urges, or behaviors involving sexual activity with pre-pedobusal children or children generally 13 or younger. So, in other words, they have not passed on in the pre-petabussal. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. Anyway, other accusers were 16 and 17. This is a more. History offers a useful perspective in this case than psychology. The U.S. has a long history of age asymmetry when it comes to dating, courtship, and marriage throughout U.S. history. Most men dated and married younger women, including girls, no doubt about that. The entertainer Jerry Lee Lewis married a woman, a young person, 13 years old, and was his cousin. Suitability for courtship and marriage was historically predicted upon their independence and their ability to support a family, whereas women and girls were legally presumed ready for marriage once they had reached puberty. And that can be earlier and earlier these days. The law that regulated marriages used to allow girls to marry before boys. That was indeed correct. Only starting in the 70s did states equalize their laws to treat boys and girls similarly. When it came to marriage, a sexual age of consent similarly applies only to girls. When they were first passed in the U.S., that was in the 1880s, in large part because reformers had well-founded fears that older men were trying to target working-class girls for sex. In a culture such as ours that has historically identified and fetished young beauty. Now, that is one of the things, this whole idea of beauty contests, idea of cheerleaders, idea of young presenters or anchors on the evening news. And we go on here, valued girls and women for physical appearance. Far too many older men have used their relative power to take advantage of younger women and girls. The environment Moore grew up in teaches men that they can use their age, class, gender, power to gain for themselves sexually and to target working class girls who are unlikely to retaliate. One of Moore's accusers alleged that he assaulted her when she was 16, telling her that you're just a child. I'm the district attorney in whatever county that, Edward County, and if you tell anyone about this, no one will believe you. So she didn't. Waited 40 years. Anyway, that suggests that Moore might have targeted those he found attractive and who he believed he could either overpower or silence. Evidently, in one case, the woman claimed that when she fought back, Moore gave it up and just left, as OBJ would say. Like Moore, alleged victims, the vast majority of those who suffer child and teenage sexual assault are women. That does not demonstrate that the U.S. was a nation of men afflicted with pedophilia. Rather, we should take from sobering statistics about assault and abuse is that many men use their power, their gender and age, to target those who are particularly vulnerable and those that can be pressured into silence, like in Hollywood. In the midst of a storm of sexual allegations against the powerful men in the world of politics and entertainment, we should see Moore not as an outliner, but another man who allegedly used his position to force upon those who he believed were vulnerable. And that is it. There's a hashtag there. And this is where a social science is used, in this case psychology. In the manual there, when you go to it, the Diagnosis and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And when you get into the Daily News, these tabloids and the rest of them there, they confuse the issue. Moore is not a pedophile. And if the allegations are correct, he just abused his power. But that was, one thing to remember, that was not something unusual, an outliner at the time, Moore, and even to the present day. A lot of this is still going on. There's also was an article in the Post about the restaurant industry, where women are particularly vulnerable there because of storage rooms, service stations. They're moving around in close quarters, tables and that sort of thing, and can be, as they say, touched there, and various other things, even the cooler there, so nothing unusual. From E.J. Dion here, sometimes the Democratic Party amazes me, and not in a good way. Here is party fresh off a series of big election triumphs all over the country. The nation faces unprecedented challenges brought upon by DJ Trump, taking irresponsibility. Republicans are pushing through the most reactionary tax bills since the roaring 1920s. And what do leading Democrats want to do? They want to have us engage in the move left, the move to the center, squabbling about that has obsessed the party for at least 3 decades. Old arguments and feel comfortable, but they are inadequate for the moment. And new research is finding that bickering does not match the mood of the anti-Trump activists. Ever since DJ Trump surprise victory, and the distinguished Howard University scholar Peter Shapu has been spending a lot of time in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Ohio with her colleagues Mary Waters and Kathy Swartz. They are talking to leaders, rank and file citizens in 2 counties in each state to track changes in the political in our political outcomes in 2017. They are studying in all the counties. They're studying the voted for Trump and everyone else. The new anti-Trump organizations have risen up. Research has found 10 groups so far. By the way, all these groups are co-led by women. That is not unusual there, as a result of the Women's March. And in many progressive organizations, including in the civil rights movement, where like Dr. King, etc., were the spokesman, but a lot of the grassroots work were done by the Rosa Parks of the world. What struck Chapeau, it's Skocpol, is how irrelevant the Democrats tied quadres to these freshly engaged citizens. At the grassroots, people are dealing with the crisis the DJ Trump presidency presented to America, and they are not refighting the election of 2016, she said in an interview. They are not talking about whether the Democratic Party should be more progressive or more centrist. Yeah, we've been talking about it anyway. In fact, she finds that both Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton supporters are indeed involved, which shows how you can energize citizens' action that doesn't have to sort out national labels. Activism, as Chapeau sees, is motivated by a simple but powerful civic sense that DJ Trump is violating basic norms and principles of American life. Troops on the ground don't need programs or litmus tests imposed from on high, she added. They need practical support and freedom to act as they see fit in their own areas. Well, Donna Brazile talked about this. The lessons this month election saw victories by Democrats across political spectrums of opinion, in the election of Ralph Northam, ran a moderate campaign, no doubt, while down-ticket winners in the race include a number of members of Democratic Socialists of America, as well as an openly transgender person. She knocked out the fellow that called himself the homophobe. Anyway. Voters in Virginia, New Jersey, and elsewhere said to Washington Democrats, "Stop it with your stupid fights. We have work to do." And of course, Democrats will have serious debates as time goes on over issues from healthcare to economics to trade to education. But such discussions, are healthy and necessary as long as they don't involve promiscuous applied ideological purity tests. Yeah. Yes and no. And yes, the party is more progressive on certain questions than it used to be. It is rightly more committed, for example, to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender rights. But so is the country as a whole. There's no doubt about that. He's gotten to the point in America that someone running an anti-gay, anti-lesbian, anti-transgender rights campaign will not go very far. Now, in some places, it has a little bit of currency, but very, very little. There's been strong response from Democrats of all races to police shootings of young, unarmed African Americans, but this is less a move to the left than an expression of simple decency. Well, there are two things going on there. There's an expression of decency. That's where you have the what I call the church type people there, religious types, not necessarily evangelical God boys, but that is where you have in there a so-called petty moralizing. But the brunt of the work is done by people that are victims of police brutality, and their relatives or friends or people in their communities have been killed. They are in prison unjustly, sentences in many places for the mere violation of having a gun. Now they moved in some jurisdictions just having ammo, and where they come into these minimal sentence deals that judges impose, say 3 to 6 years. It can be even up to 10 years on certain crimes. That is no more than just warehousing people. This is why the struggle goes on. And I was reading the other day that there'll be a week of protests around these issues before the Super Bowl game in February out in the Midwest city of Minneapolis. So in other words, these things are going on. The boycott movement at NFL is going on for the broad line of social justice. So there are activities moving. There's a lawsuit against Tesla, the high-tech automaker, for discrimination against African Americans out in California, down in Los Angeles to be precise. So these things are moving on. Now, is it an indication that the country is moving more to the left? Yes, it is moving more to the left than before. And also the election of DJ Trump, because DJ Trump, many of his so-called new foreign policy, his cleaning of the swamp, those are populist, more center-left than center-right positions. But what DJ Trump did was the swamp has gotten neglected, and in fact, the water is rising, as the spill out in South Dakota indicated. And the foreign policy is all about, as he told the Koreans, buying our weaponry, selling things to the Saudis. In other words, it's a merchandising act. And merchandising acts, by their definition, you end up with a tax bill that benefits the rich, period. So these are the kinds of things out there. E.J. Dionne, one of our favored liberal types, but you have to remember he is a liberal type. People now are moving on past being just liberals and moving to progressives. Now, even Hillary Clinton realized that she termed herself a progressive and not necessarily a liberal. Unfortunately for the Hillary, she didn't run the progressive campaign. She ran a neoliberal campaign. Enough about that foolishness. Anyway, nonetheless, as we move on here, I'll take one look here at we get from the people at Facing South. This is Rebecca Barber writing here. Meet the South's history-making winners in this year's election. A year ago this week, U.S. voters elected DJ Trump. Yeah, we reminded of that one. But dramatic political swings, like from the first African-American president to the writer Ta-Nehisi Coates, what he called America's first white president. Well, in 8 years we were in power, and now we're out. And that we have witnessed this week, off-year elections. The wave brought historic victories for people of color, LGBT across the South. Dawn Adams, somebody in Virginia, became the first out lesbian to be elected to the House of Delegates. A political newcomer from Richmond defeated a 5-term GOP type there in that area. Hala Eras and Elizabeth Guzman in Virginia from Prince Henry County, sorry about that, became the first Latinos. Okay. The women's right advocate there, and former president of the Prince William chapter of the National Organization for Women. Let me get her name here. Somewhere here. Higher. Yair. Anyway, and Guzman, who backed Bernie Sanders' Our Revolution support, expanded Medicare executive. She defeated an 8-term Republican by the name of Lee Scott Lemonfletcher. Anyway, Brandon Barber in South Carolina became the first African American elected to serve as Georgetown, South Carolina, as a majority, I guess, African American city. Booker in Georgia, Guion, first African American mayor of Cairo, Georgia. Not sure where that is. Nonetheless, Stephanie Kuzan became the first openly transgender person. He won a council seat in Doraville, that's a city in DeKalb County. Laos, the first African American woman mayor of Charlotte, North Carolina. Jonathan McCullough in Georgia became the first African American elected to serve as mayor of Statesboro, a city of 28,000 in southeast Georgia. Mary Parkham, first African American woman elected to serve as a mayor of let's see, what is that? Middle Edgeville, Georgia, 18,000 people there. Danka Rome in Virginia, the House of Delegates was elected there. She defeated a 25-year incumbent, Bob Marshall. Kathy Tran, that's in Virginia, the first Asian American elected to the House of Delegates in Virginia. The West Springfield native defeated a Republican there to represent the Northern Virginia 42nd House District. Captured 61% of the votes. She was an infant brought here from Vietnam. So this is Rebecca Barber. A nice picture of her. Is a researcher and writer at Facing South Institute for Southern Studies there, the Fight for 15. And she's from Central University in Durham, North Carolina. I get that one right here. Nonetheless, Nancy Lockhart would be happy with that particular thing. Facing South, we like to bring that in as we would have not gotten some of the information that we now have. Incidentally, Al Franken's on the continuous attack. We hadn't talked much about his situation. It was a skit, a USO skit anyway. Not a big deal, but now looking at the local papers there in Minnesota, that people have been demanding his resignation. A David Letterman show that he was supposed to be in, now he'll just be on the final part of it there. So, period. Oh, I always have to. Charles Manson, cult leader, dies. Well, what was he? Let's see here. He was in hospital in Bakersfield, somewhere around Bakersfield there. Yeah, it was, let's see how it was, Manson. We get to where he was. Charles Manson. Oops. And that was in Los Angeles. That was in 1969, a long time ago that happened. Manson, whose name to this day is synonymous with the unspeakable violence there, etc. Period. He was in his 80s, nonetheless. 83. That he finally died. He escaped the death penalty because California took it away in the 70s. Vicki Waters, who is a spokesman for the Department of Corrections, said an autopsy will be performed. But what comes after that is unclear. Prison officials previously said Manson had no known next of kin, and state law says if no relative or legal representative surface within 10 days, then it's up to the estate to determine where the body is buried or cremated. They probably will cremate his body, and that will be the last of Mr. Charles Manson. But evidently in prison he had a hellacious following there of white supremacists inside of prison, more than he had outside of prison, quite literally. So nonetheless, Charles Manson dead at 83. One less to worry about, no doubt about that. But today, the Charles Manson section has more members and more advanced ideology, alt-white when you think of them. They weren't marching around talking about they would replace us. So in other words, it is totally different than it used to be. It's no longer a situation like that. On Al Franken, he was cut out. This is a PBS special that David Letterman was having, and he will only appear in a tape thing in the last. In other words, he will not be in there. Now, I'm not certain of what this is supposed to do, but it is a sign of the times where people overreact, and we just finished the thing on Roy Moore, pedophilia, etc. Not he had anything to do with that, but when you start talking, I think his crime was 10 years ago or 11 years ago, something like that, before he even went into the Senate, and people that would normally have cooler heads are talking about censoring Al Franken for something he did even before he was a senator. Now that's when it gets to the ridiculous. What happens is politicians fear reaction, so they run to it. It's kind of a herd thing. It's a very, very unfortunate situation that they find themselves in, period. And they are. One other additional death here, Eddie Hyman. He played the father on The Cosby Show. Dead at 91 here. So, in other words, we have a few going along here. Oh, and another one here. Reaction from the music world, Mel Tillis. I didn't know Mel Tillis had died. He was 85 years old. Boy, we're doing obituaries right and left here. Reaction from Mel Tillis. Remember Mel Tillis? He was one of the primary singers at one time. A stand-up comedian. Then was Mel Tillis. His humorous misadventures and legends, etc. there. Ray Stevens, Mac Davis, I remember them. And Mel Tillis and some of his songs and various other things that Mel Tillis did. So do it for us. Have a good next week there, and a happy Turkey Day, an early happy Turkey Day. We will have a Turkey Day program. Nonetheless, for the Monday Morning Quarterback, this is Boston Red on the 20th of November 2017. Good day.